That's what we'll call this.
Between two
tropical plants.
So Kafka is the most commonly used event broker. What are the most common challenges around managing Kafka that you see large companies face?
So when we speak to these sort of customers that have implemented Kafka and are maybe put it into production or starting to have a lot of adoption around it, there's a couple of areas that we see people really struggling with. And one of them is around the security. People are not necessarily comfortable putting that sort of data in the hands of customers. I know this is one of your one thing that's very close to your heart, Rory.
Hugely. No, that is, it's a good point. I think that one of the challenges we do see that customers face is they become very accustomed to ways of applying security and security mechanisms, let's say with APIs, but then trying to, what we've noticed them start to do is that when they have a challenge with Kafka, they naturally don't expose the data, essentially. What they then do is say, well, actually, let's just keep it purely internal and stuff like this. But there's a huge amount of value in the Kafka data. And really being able to expose that effectively and apply a lot of the same principles from a security perspective as you would with your APIs is super helpful. So I agree with Dennis, like security is a big one. So applying things like using JWT, using OAuth 2, using rate limiting, all these sorts of things on top of Kafka natively is a big one for a lot of customers. Also making things, so if you think about like the developer's experience, so the second pillar, we think of it as sort of 4 pillars, and we'll go through the 4 pillars. One of them obviously is security, as Dennis has mentioned. But the second is what we call developer experience, and this is more about making things discoverable. So again, think about your experience with API management. What do people expect to be able to do is they expect to be able to go and discover all the different data services, all the different APIs. So making events as discoverable with the same sort of things like subscription management and stuff like that in a consistent way is a really, really core second pillar as well. But I'll let my assistant take over and do the fifth.
Yeah, and if you look at how organizations have been working with REST APIs, a very common way to build program around your data is to actually productize your REST APIs, and your partners and your customers see them as valuable experiences for you as a business. And for you then to build a program where you can safely and securely expose those APIs to your customers and partners and maybe build new revenue streams or just improve the user experience, it's like a very, very core critical capability of how organizations are managing REST APIs. And that doesn't apply to the world of Kafka yet. So whenever someone is getting asked, hey, I do have a customer over here that really needs this real-time data, I want them to have it. As a platform engineer or as a senior architect that is tasked to deliver that to the customer, it's very, very difficult because you don't have the same tooling around security, governance, subscription management, access control as you would have had for doing the same with your REST APIs.
Can you speak to any of the challenges related to managing cost when it comes to Kafka?
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. So what we find with a lot of customers, so similar to the security and all these other sorts of bits that people struggle with, is that when a lot of the streaming platforms, let's be frank about it, quite expensive, and you need a lot of compute power and all that sort of stuff to be able to utilize them effectively. And the nature of them, you've got high throughput, all this sort of stuff that people are needing to do. One of the things that a number of our customers have approached us about, which is really interesting actually from our perspective, and Linus will be able to go into this in more detail, is talking about things like virtual topics, virtual partitions. So you might have, for example, one really big topic, and what you want your consumer or the person who's looking at the data, for example, is to have a different consumption experience. So let's say, although you've got one very large topic, they might want to have different entry points, let's say, or entry pathways into that topic that maybe you put specific tags on, so you can use Gravitee's transformation capability. So much like I was speaking about with security, where you can apply things like JWT, OAuth 2, one of the beauties of Gravitee is because we've got such a rich history of API management and the standard ways you would do stuff of applying policies and all this sort of stuff. You can do the same sorts of things on your messages that are going through. So you can apply on the native Kafka messages transformation, so apply different headers and all this sort of stuff, so that actually then you can enable the Kafka gateway to do routing essentially and to choose different topics. So it creates this virtual layer that sits on top of those topics to be able to create a view, let's say, that your consumers want to see, but actually behind the scenes, you're not having to have all of the compute power and all of the stuff that you would have had to add in historically. And so what that enables you to do is to be much more condensed or contract your spend as a result of that.
Yeah.
But Linus can give more detail.
Yeah, and I think a big problem when it comes to cost as well is the governance associated with it. So today what we see a lot of our customers doing is almost allowing anyone in the organization to create new topics, to create new clusters, to go and do anything, as you can imagine, on a Kafka cluster. And that then typically leads to a huge amount of topics with a lot of different kind of partitions and clusters and so forth, which obviously increases the scale. So what we are typically telling customers is to try to build more of a federated governed model where you enforce common standards and rule sets for when creating topics and how those topics should look and stuff like that. Beyond, of course, the virtual clusters and virtual topics that helps you virtualize and concentrate your physical infrastructure with more virtualized concepts for consumers.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So we see challenges related to managing costs. We see challenges related to customer and dev experience, security, access control. How does Gravitee help overcome these challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think, a lot of what we've spoken about in terms of, as you rightly pointed out, the cost aspect of things, the security, all those sorts of things, discoverability about certain things. If I characterized it in one phrase, I'd say it's like API management, but for Kafka. That's the easiest way to think about it a lot of times. People, API management is a mature market that people have become very familiar with over the course of 20, 25 years, let's say. And really, the concept of event stream management, which is applying the same principles of API management but for events, doesn't really exist. It hasn't existed to this particular point in time. And if you say, hey, I want to be able to apply security, I want to be able to apply JWT L2 rate limiting, I want to be able to do transformations on my Kafka stream, all these different sorts of things that you would think as a sort of table stakes for API management. Try and do that in an event world, and you immediately come into very big hurdles, essentially. And that's what Gravitee can do for companies, is that simplistically, all of the stuff that you would have expected to be able to achieve with API management, you can now achieve the same things, but in an event world. So with your Kafka topics as well. That really is, in a nutshell, what Gravitee can provide, and what we're doing with loads of our customers, actually.
And technically speaking, what that means is that we now have a platform where if you're a customer and you want to expose your Kafka as REST APIs or WebSocket or webhook or certain event, you can simply put the Gravitee gateway in front of your Kafka cluster and allow your client to then communicate through the secure Gravitee gateway, and then allow your clients to use whatever protocol you may see fit for them, but still applying the same concepts as for traditional API management with a developer portal, policy application for rate limiting or transformation or validation of schemas with a schema registry, or indeed with our Kafka gateway, allow your client to use Kafka protocols and the full powers of Kafka capabilities, but again, with API management capabilities, rate limiting, quotas, subscription management, analytics, every of those aspects on your Kafka streams.
One platform to rule it all.
Absolutely. That's what I say.
So how do you see the convergence of APIs and event streams?
Well, one word, Gravitee.
Gravitee.
That's all you have to say. It's a really interesting one, this one, because Linus has spoken a lot in the past about platform engineering teams, all this sort of stuff, and I think that's a really important point. Is that we are seeing that there are a greater, and there's graphics that we'll be able to provide alongside the video in terms of looking at how different organizations view this type of challenge. There's many, what we see is there is a trend, and I think one of the infographics that will probably have links to the video will show how different organizations manage events versus APIs. And what we are starting to see a much more significant trend associated with is this concept of platform engineering, where APIs and events are actually owned in one single space, essentially. And those people generally have a greater awareness of the converging challenge that you have with APIs and events. And it really comes back to the point I made a moment ago, which is that everything, it's like API management, but for Kafka. So why should they be two separate things? And that's really our approach, is that because we have such a rich history and, a leader in the Gartner Quadrant, all these sorts of things for API management, our view is, well, actually, people and data consumers and data administrators and people that are using things like Kafka and all those sorts of technologies should expect to be able to have the same capability that you would for API management. Just because they're moving at different velocities, you should still be able to have the same analytics, like Linus said. You should still be able to rate limit, quota, govern, secure it in different ways, all this sort of stuff. And that really, that's why I would say that our perspective is that the two should be unified. And that really, that's where Gravitee is at the forefront of all of those sorts of things.
Yeah. And if you're a developer, you really should only have to come to one developer portal for discovering REST APIs, Kafka APIs, other event broker APIs, seeing the documentation, understanding what they can do for you, how you can actually use them to build your applications, subscribing to them in one place, viewing the analytics and understanding how your applications are performing. It shouldn't be a case of you going to 5 different solutions, having to go and ask and knock on multiple doors to get access to all these different systems effectively. And if you're on the other side of the fence, if you're a platform engineering team, if you're an API provider or a data provider, you should have one place where you can see, okay, am I securing my data interfaces correctly? Do I have the right documentation? Do I live up to the standards of my organization when it comes to compliance, security, documentation, user experience, and have that as a one single pane of glass, regardless of the sort of volume and velocity of the data, whether that is a REST API or a Kafka topic or whatever that might be. And that's where we're going with Gravitee. One place for developers and one place for platform engineering teams to manage the assets that they expose.
A one-stop shop.
A one-stop shop. Be there or be square.
Hey, we meet a lot of enterprises that are adopting Kafka but are struggling to maximize the value. They struggle with security, governance, and exposing that data to partners and customers. At Gravitee, with our protocol mediation and Kafka gateway capability, we're bringing API management-like capabilities around the life cycle of your Kafka ecosystem. We can monitor, control, govern, rate limit, transform the data in and out of your Kafka system. We provide subscription management, developer portal for documentation and governance of your Kafka topics and brokers. We'd love to sit down and talk to you about we've helped other customers overcome challenges in Kafka and unlock the true value of Kafka, give you a demo and have you try out the product itself. Looking forward to speaking to you.